My father slammed his hand onto the mahogany dining table, his face turning a deep, dangerous shade of crimson. You will clear your sister's $240,000 debt by Friday, or as far as this family is concerned, you are no longer my child, he growled, expecting me to break down, plead for mercy, or empty my life savings right on the spot. My mother sat beside him nodding in agreement, while my golden child sister smirked, convinced she had just cornered me. But I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I simply looked my father dead in the eye, took a slow breath, and said, "Then I'm not." They thought it was an empty bluff from a obedient daughter. What they didn't know was that by forcing this ultimatum, they had just triggered an automated legal and financial domino effect that would completely dismantle their scheme and leave them begging at my locked door 7 days later. My name is Clara Vance. I am 32 years old, and as a forensic accountant, my entire career is built on tracking hidden numbers, dissecting fraudulent ledgers, and uncovering hard truths that people desperately try to hide. But no professional audit could have prepared me for the toxic math running through my own family. For as long as I can remember, my household operated under a brutal, unspoken hierarchy. My younger sister, Sienna, was the unquestioned golden child, a spoiled, status-obsessed socialite whose endless series of failed business ventures and maxed-out credit cards were constantly swept under the rug by my parents. Meanwhile, I was the quiet, invisible pillar. I worked exhausting 70-hour weeks, skipped vacations, and saved every single dollar to build a financially secure, independent life completely on my own. To my parents, my hard work wasn't something to be proud of. It was simply a collective family resource waiting to be tapped. The boiling point arrived on a rainy Tuesday evening during what was supposed to be a simple family dinner. As soon as I sat down, the polite pretense evaporated. My father slammed his hand onto the mahogany dining table, his face turning a deep, dangerous shade of crimson as he slid a thick folder across the wood. It was an urgent bank demand for $240,000, the total defaulted balance on Sienna's failed boutique business. You will clear your sister's $240,000 debt by Friday, my father barked, his voice echoing off the high ceilings. Or, as far as this family is concerned, you are no longer my child. My mother sat beside him, nodding in smug agreement, while Sienna offered a cruel, victorious smirk. They genuinely believed they had backed me into a corner where I would break down, cry, and hand over my hard-earned life savings just to keep their love. Instead, I took a slow, deep breath, looked my father dead in the eye, and said, "Then I'm not." I walked out of that restaurant in complete, freezing silence, leaving my parents and Sienna staring at my empty chair in disbelief. But while they thought I was driving home in tears to pack my bags, the forensic accountant in me was already going to work. The moment I stepped into my home office, I opened my laptop and began a deep dive audit into how my sister had managed to run up a staggering $240,000 in defaulted business debt. Sienna had always lived beyond her means, but $240,000 wasn't just bad budgeting, it was catastrophic. As I systematically pulled public corporate registries, property filings, and credit bureau disclosures, the pieces of her elaborate web began to fall into place. What I uncovered turned my blood to absolute ice. Sienna hadn't just mismanaged her luxury clothing boutique. 3 years ago, when the bank initially refused to approve her commercial loan due to her abysmal credit score, my father had stepped in. But he didn't use his own collateral. Utilizing an outdated, limited power of attorney I had signed years ago when I was hospitalized for a minor surgery, my father had quietly listed me as the primary co-guarantor on Sienna's $200,000 corporate line of credit. They hadn't just expected me to pay off her debt out of family loyalty. They had set up a legal trap years ago, ensuring that when Sienna predictably bankrupted her business, the bank would come knocking on my door to seize my assets. They treated my hard-earned savings like their personal emergency insurance policy, completely unbothered by the fact that forging my liability could destroy my professional license and financial future. Before I reveal the exact legal counterstrike I launched to snap their trap shut, I want to ask you watching right now, what would you do if your own family forged your signature to cover a golden child's mistakes? Take a quick second to comment below with your thoughts and the city you're watching from so I can see how far Clara's story reaches across the world. They thought they had maneuvered me into an inescapable corner, but they had completely forgotten who actually understood the law. By Friday morning, the deadline my father had arrogantly set for me to surrender my savings arrived. But instead of driving over to my parents' house with a checkbook, I walked straight into the downtown office of Arthur Vance, one of the sharpest corporate fraud attorneys in the state. Sitting across from him at a polished mahogany table, I laid out the evidence. The original power of attorney document, the forged commercial loan signatures, the bank statements, and the audio recording of my father's ultimatum from Tuesday night. Arthur reviewed the documents with a calm, clinical focus before leaning back in his leather chair with a sharp, calculating smile. "They built a house of cards, Clara," Arthur said, sliding the file back to me. "And they handed you the exact match needed to burn it to the ground. We didn't waste a single minute." Right there from his office, Arthur executed a precise, multi-layered legal counterstrike. First, we filed an official affidavit of forgery and unauthorized identity usage directly with the lending institution's fraud department. Because the loan had been underwritten using an outdated power of attorney without my explicit verification, the bank was legally obligated to sever my name from the $240,000 debt immediately. Second, I initiated an immediate revocation of all family-related trust ties and transferred my personal capital, real estate, and corporate accounts into an independent, irrevocable private trust. My assets were now entirely untouchable. Finally, Arthur submitted a formal corporate disclosure to the bank, revealing that my father had intentionally misreported his own personal liability assets to secure Sienna's commercial line of credit. The automated domino effect was instantaneous and absolute. The second the bank's compliance system processed the fraud report, Sienna's $240,000 defaulted loan was immediately reassigned solely to the primary guarantor, my father. Because he had pledged his personal accounts and primary estate as secondary collateral, the bank automatically froze his business lines, locked his credit cards, and issued an urgent demand for full repayment within 72 hours. My parents had spent years using my name as a human shield to absorb their golden child's reckless lifestyle. But by forcing me to choose between my financial survival and their toxic conditional love, they had locked themselves inside their own trap. As I walked out of Arthur's office into the bright morning sun, my phone began to vibrate violently in my purse. The first wave of frantic calls had begun, but I simply turned the device face down and smiled. Over the next 48 hours, my phone transformed into an absolute war zone. I received 57 missed calls and dozens of furious text messages from my mother, aunts, uncles, and distant cousins. My mother left hysterical voicemails screaming that I was a cold-hearted monster who was driving my father into an early grave, while my extended family bombarded me with lectures about the sanctity of blood and family duty. They claimed I had betrayed my own flesh and blood, completely oblivious to the fact that my father and sister had committed federal loan fraud using my name. I didn't reply to a single message. I knew that engaging with their toxic outrage would only feed their narrative. Exactly 7 days after my father delivered his arrogant ultimatum, the final confrontation arrived at my doorstep. It was a chilly Saturday morning when a fleet of luxury cars rumbled into my driveway. I stood by my second-floor window and watched 5 family members step out. My father, my mother, Sienna, and 2 of my most outspoken uncles who had led the smear campaign against me. They marched up my front walkway with an air of frantic entitlement, believing they could corner me in my own home and force me to unlock my accounts. The heavy oak front door rang with aggressive, demanding pounding. But they didn't walk into a defenseless house. I calmly walked downstairs, flanked by my attorney, Arthur Vance, and a uniformed private security officer I had hired for the morning. I unlocked the deadbolt and pulled the door open just a few inches. The moment my father saw me, his face contorted in a mix of desperate rage and sheer panic. "Clara, unlock the bank accounts right now," he demanded, his voice cracking with embarrassment in front of my uncles. "The bank has frozen our personal assets and threatened to seize the house. How dare you do this to your family?" Sienna stepped forward, her eyes red and puffy from crying, her polished socialite facade completely shattered. "Clara, please," she sobbed, holding out her hands. "If you don't drop the fraud report, I could face criminal charges. You're ruining my life." I didn't yell, and I didn't let them see an ounce of the pain they had caused me over the years. Instead, Arthur stepped forward, pulled a thick manila folder from his briefcase, and handed my father a certified cease and desist order alongside a copy of the formal fraud audit. "Mr. Vance, if you or any member of this family steps foot on this property again, you will be arrested for criminal trespassing," Arthur declared coldly. "You have 24 hours to clear your debts through your own means." The heavy, suffocating silence that followed Arthur's warning was broken only by the cold wind sweeping across my porch. My father stood frozen, staring at the cease and desist order, while my mother and uncles looked on in absolute, stunned horror. The smug entitlement that had governed our family for decades completely dissolved right before my eyes, replaced by the terrifying realization that their greed had finally caught up to them. Without my capital to absorb Sienna's $240,000 defaulted loan, the dominoes fell with brutal speed. The bank initiated immediate recovery proceedings against my father as the secondary guarantor. To avoid total corporate bankruptcy and public humiliation, my parents were forced to put their sprawling suburban home on the market, liquidate their luxury vehicles, and drastically downsize to a modest two-bedroom rental on the edge of town. As for Sienna, the golden child's illusion was permanently shattered. Faced with potential criminal charges for corporate loan fraud, she was forced to surrender her high society lifestyle, close her boutique, and take a grueling full-time job to slowly pay off her remaining personal liabilities. For the first time in her life, she had to face the real-world consequences of her own actions without an invisible safety net to catch her. Standing on my porch that morning, watching their luxury cars slowly back out of my driveway for the last time, a profound wave of peace washed over my chest. I realized that cutting ties with them wasn't about seeking petty revenge or nursing old wounds. It was about protecting my hard-earned peace, my dignity, and my future. When my father told me I was no longer his child, he thought he was delivering a death sentence to my spirit. In reality, he gave me the ultimate gift, my total freedom. Now, I'm curious about you who followed my story until the end. What would you have done if your parents gave you an ultimatum like that? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more real stories. Thank you for watching.